Okay. So, Mr. Roy, will you please introduce yourself?
Um, my name is Roy Arnold. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Podkesmas Asia. And Podkesmas Asia is the leading podcast production company in Southeast Asia, focusing on producing or acquiring IPs that's entertaining and delightful for all ages and varieties of genres, which we are proudly to say that we have resulted for 100 millions of play, millions of users, and we have super fans that have been attached to us and try to listen to our podcast on a weekly basis or even on a daily basis. And we will be venturing soon more towards a tech audio landscape or tech audio spaces where we see there's a potential growth that we can actually explore more in that area.
Okay, so podcasts have been around like for a long time before, but it has only been picked up its popularity recently. Why do you think that podcasts have gained so much attention now than before?
There are a couple of reasons why podcast has been growing pretty rapidly in the past 1 or 2 years. I think what we have seen today in the Southeast Asia region in particular, and specifically Indonesia, is what we have saw or have seen in US in the past 2 or 3 years ago, where we've seen the growth of supply and we have also seen the growth of demand by itself. This is, I believe, is similar to what has happened with the old days when YouTube start expanding or videos start expanding and penetrating across the globe. So you can see that there are three things fundamentally that happens. The first fundamental, there's a global platform that are actually venturing very seriously and expanding their presence across the region and across the globe. That's one part. The other part is that when you look at from the supply side is that there's a lot of people that are interesting from a hobbyist perspective, or they started with a hobbyist, now become more of a professionalism. Now, what's differentiate when you look podcasts and a video such as what we've seen like YouTube in the past is that the transition from a hobbyist to a professional it's quite very quick, I believe. When you look at it, it took sometimes for when you look at people or content creator on a video channels to become more professionals, while in the podcast businesses, because it started as a very professional, as a platform venture to our market, it's already begun in a very professional sense. So those are the second part when you see there's a growth of supply. The third part is the tech and the tech side. When I talk about the tech side, there are many fundamentals when you look at the tech side. The first is, of course, the mobile penetration. So when you look at the mobile penetration across the region globally, it shows a very spectacular numbers, right? Even in Indonesia alone, to say. And then the second, when you look at the tech side of audio, is that it 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 progressed very rapidly, where then people are developing software that can edit easily on the fly or record the platform that also acquiring a recording technology that enable for hobbyists to record and host their podcast. It actually helps enabling the podcaster to actually venture more, right? So then it helps the supply side for it. And while the platform helps not only on the supply side, but it also helps on taking care of the demand side, which is people start want to listen more podcasts. Now they have places where they want to go rather than to go to individual website. Now they can go actually go to one part of a platform, which is the Spotify, the Google podcast, the Apple podcast, you can name it. It's every day now. There's new platform coming in, and potentially they're venturing with the audio spaces, right? And the third part of after the tech part, of course, then you can see that from a user perspective, also realize when they're listening to audio, it actually give them more freedom to listen beyond what they have done or experienced previously when they're watching videos, because it's limited, right? Because when you're watching video, it's limited to a time bound. You have to be very focusing on watching video. But while you are listening to audio, you can do a multitask, right? And then if you look at the generation right now in Southeast Asia, the Gen Z, they are very mobile centric. They are people that want to do multitasking. So it fits to their needs when they want to listen as an alternative of entertaining and relaxing themselves or learning, even learning of many things. Now they have this option rather than watching videos. Now they can actually listen to audio, and it will not be limited to only at one places. Even they can actually close their eyes and still listening to audio.
Okay. So right now, like most medias have gone digital, and so is a podcast is one part of that. So how do you think that digitalization has changed the way media now present themselves? Like for example, like podcast. Usually before it was like a radio talk or something like that, but now it has gone digital. How do you think that has changed uh, the media landscape right now?
I think the change or the evolution, I would say not even the evolution, the revolution that happens already when you look at, again, I keep talking about the supply side and the demand side, it actually fulfill each other. I mean, because, the growth of any industry is always dependent how much the growth from the supply side and versus the demand side, right? But you can see that there's a huge demand and there's a huge growth that happening. When the projection of a podcast market size alone is basically they're looking at a 98 billion US dollar of market size. Right? And then when you look at the potentials that uh, revenue stream that actually, a part of that 98.6 billion, there are some component actually sits in on the advertising side, right? So that's kind of like fulfill when there is a demand, then how can you optimize for this demand beyond just fulfilling their needs, right? So that there's a revenue or there's a business model. Currently, right now, US are projected by today, by 2021, they will surpass 1 billion of revenue from advertising on podcast businesses. Now, there's a many form when you talk about the podcast business. But now coming back to your question, what actually happened with the supply side and the demand side is that for the supply side, there is options for people to record. Of course, there's still challenges of editing those sound, those audio to become more professional because it will take them another 3 to 4 software actually to actually edit so that it become more professional. But there is a need, there is a hunger for these people on the supply side that they want to record themselves and want to be listened from across sector, across genre, across ages, right? Now, what technology has helped is actually it diminished the boundary that exists in radio, where in radio you talk about frequency. Now, with digitalization, is that you can record and immediately people actually can listen to it and repeatedly listening to those content. While if you in radio, it's just one time and you can't listen it over and over again. So it gives an option for listener to listen continuously, repetitively, so that will entertain in the demand side. When you look at the demand side, again, there's a lot of uh, revolution that happens, or the evolution of technology. That the audios of a mobile now can actually do a Dolby Atmos. Now even a phone, you can listen to very immersive content. So what happened is from the demand side, they're not listening only on the mono side of audio content, but now they can hear it on a stereo base. Now, even when you talk about the stereo base of of an audio technology side, it actually expands even more. Now you can start listening a more a sense of a 360-degree model of a sound. So now it's become binaural. So you can binaural, component of audio, stereo. So now everybody gets entertained, right? It's not limited anymore just to one particular mode of sound. Now you can create a very immersive sound which you cannot imagine 2, 3 years ago from an audio perspective. So now you can actually listen to audio and play with your theater of mind really based on the audio results. So now the technology enable those two parts, on the supply side and on the demand side. And the other part that helps from the supply side and the demand side is, of course, there's a growth of opportunity when you talk about uh, how can you make a business model, because you talk about sustainability, right? And when you create an industry, what is the business model that actually exists in that particular industry? And there's a vast model of business streams that actually can exist in a podcast business, and digitalizations helps and enable that opportunity. You're talking about how can you create an audio and maybe to the extreme become an NFT, right? And now you talk about the blockchain. How does the blockchain enables that? And then you talk about the transactional, the transactional gateway for financial transactions. Now, everybody can even have their own business model, and the technology helps them from the financial transaction, from the expansion of a financial transactions, from a certificate or for to make the enablement of this transaction. So everything is there from supply side, from the demand side, and the technology that encapsulate for enablement on the business side.
So in your opinion, will podcast be bigger in the future, or will it be just like right now? Because as we previously talked before, podcast has just recently gained its popularity. So do you think that this popularity right now that podcast has gained will also be transferred to the future? And how do you see the future of podcasts?
I think the future of podcast is very positive. Of course, when you look at Podkesmas Asia as a production company, as an IT house, is that there are multitude of opportunity when we look at the podcast businesses. Now, the future of podcast, it's going to be very interesting. Why is it very interesting? Because people love to play in their minds, the theater of mind, right? That's why you love to watch video. Because this, as you are watching that, it gets translated visually. There's a sound that actually complement that enables that theater of mind. Now, with an audio, you can actually play with your own theater of mind. So what an audio will provide is a mean for you to create your theater of mind, but then it gets expanded where you want to be from a theater of mind perspective. The second part, when I say that it's still growing pretty fast and it will grow pretty fast, right now in Southeast Asia alone, we're looking at 300 million audio listeners. Now, imagine that there's a huge opportunity where we can see that the growth of podcasts is going to be tremendous, as it's going to reach to it that to the peak of a 300 million audios, and it will continue of growing. Right now, we're looking at 300 million, but I believe that with the Gen Z that love to do multitasking, one of the they want to use audio as the mean for them to actually entertain themselves, or they want to educate themselves. Even from an education perspective, what audios provide is that you can listen anywhere, anytime, without have to open your eyes. So you can actually keep continuous and listening to the audio content, right? So there is this new model, even in China, where the podcast business is become the way for people to subscribe an educational model of an audio, which using audio to do it. Right? So what we see from a business perspective is that there are many models that you can actually implement for the growth and to make sure that there is sustainability as a growth for this industry. You can talk about from advertising, you talk about IPs get transformed from audio to video, like we've seen today, even in US right now, there's a lot of podcasts that has been transformed, and a podcast IP that has been transformed to become a video series or mini series in OTT platform. I give you a name, which is Dr. Death. That's one example. And there's Homecoming. And there are many actually content that has been transformed from its original form, which is only audio, now become video because people are looking for new stories to be visualized. And Click Media House is looking for that sources. So the second is from an IP expansion. And when we talk about IP expansion, it starts from audio. It can goes beyond audio to visual, to merchandise, all the forms that you can create. Because when we talk on audio, there'll always be what we call a super fans. Because a lot of podcasts, even when we look at our current shows, we have a retention rate at average 76%, meaning people are always and continuously listening to our audio shows, and some of it even listening more than 10 times to a particular show just to repeat themselves and having a laugh or being entertained whatever the shows. That's what we see today. Even we've seen even 30x to 40x. So I just give you a number of 10x just to not to, because not everybody is listening to 40 times, but on average we're looking at a 10x that people will continuously and repeatedly listening to your content. So what does that mean? So there's another opportunity when you look at it, that could be a subscription model. So then you can start, doing it where people subscribe. You can do a time base. You can do a series base until a certain point in time. Then you need to subscribe if you want to listen further, which we already seen a hybrid model in OTT. So what you see in an OTT and soon can be also implemented in audio podcast. And the other part is that you talk about the content marketing. Now brands want to reach out to the new audiences. So they want to create content that is easily listened, not very brand centric, but try to send out a very subtle message which people would love to listen. And you can see that it will transform or brand will venture to that situation, what we already seen today. They are already actually using our shows to actually sending out message to the consumer in a very subtle way. And people that listen to podcasts tend to accept for an advertisement. That's what the research shows. So there's a component where you can use the content marketing. And I believe there are many forms, there are many models. You can do a live podcast. And if people want to join, they have to pay, they have to. What we see today, I believe it's going to be growing pretty fast. And that's just one part of the business of an audio, right? So then you talk about how can you optimize the talent for other usage. So there's a lot of approach that you can see that. That's why when we see Podkesmas Asia, we have three pillars, what we call the pillars of the studio, the pillars of the network, and the pillars of technology, because we see that this is what will grow. And the third part, why we see this is it's going to be a very interesting industry and still growing. Again, with the growth of the Gen Z, new generations, although they are being served with videos, short videos, but again, video is now reaching to its peak. That's why it's now transforming from a long form to a short form to a very mini short form. The only couple of minutes, only 1 minute to 2 minutes, right? Right. But right now, audio, it's still at its growth stage where you can still see new transformation is going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years down the road.
Okay, that's interesting. Right now, Podkesmas has about 14 regular shows, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you manage all these shows? I mean, they each have their own audience and everything. And how do you think that how do you manage them all? And will there be an expansion of other programs that you would like to do in the future?
Podkesmas Asia, the company has three pillars, like I mentioned earlier. So the first pillar is called the studio pillars, and the second is the network, and then of course the last but not least is what we call the tech part of it. The two part, which is the studio and the network, it is something that we already established as a business. Where in studio and the studio part, with the studio pillar, Podkesmas Asia has a vision to become the leading IP company in the region and of course globally. And as a studio, with the great minds of our founders, who has very vast experience in creative business, both audio and visual, we have instilled a playbook. So we have instilled a playbook on how to manage, how to produce content, and and not to forget, there are the component where we call the talent side. We have a playbook how you identify certain content, how you create content, and then how you fill in the talent that actually fits into that particular genre and particular storytelling. Right? So that's one part, creating a playbook. That's one thing that we always do in managing and growing our shows. I believe by the end of this year, we're not actually landed at 40 shows. We'll be looking around 16 to 70 shows by this December. So there's a lot of shows that we're looking at. And in 2022, your question about are we going to expand, because the vision is growing IP, we will be growing more than 30 more shows. So we're going to be growing more than 30 new shows in 2022. So we have that ambition is that we can go beyond 30 shows, and we believe that because our approach, again, is a combination using the playbook. We also have an approach that mixed between an agile approach in the tech side, where we were looking at it and immediately make a decision. We call it a data-driven creative model. So what does that mean? The data-driven creative model is that we create a content based on audience basis, based on the response after we created those content. So then we can see the traction. We can see at what minutes there will be a dropout. We can immediately see what that triggers people to be more engaging and listen more and more. So then we can make a decision, should we continue or should we conduct a quick kill those content immediately? So it is this data-driven creative, and people might say, is that gonna be diminishing the creative? No, because it started from our creative team, who, and again, with my background from a technology side, we decided let's do a mix between what we saw and what we learned from data, and use that to tweak, learn, and even produce new content that will entertain and delight our audience. So that's the studio part. So that's why we will say that we're gonna grow more than 30 shows with that playbook and using that data-driven creative. The other pillar, what we say is that when you look, and it's very important, is the talent part. So we're gonna be growing talent. We're very ambition of growing hundreds of talents as part of our portfolio. And then when we talk about hundreds of talents as part of our portfolio, that sits in our network pillars. So we want to grow the talents, creators in our pillars, hundreds of talent. And it's not limited to only in Indonesia, because by the name itself, we are already thinking about not just Indonesia, we're thinking about expanding to other markets, Malaysia, Philippines, and even Korea, or even globally, because those talents will provide its culture adaptation. So that's what we see, and there is distinctively differentiator when you talk about cultures, right? So because the local talent has their own way of sending out the message, a different genre. You have to, even the genre is talk about comedy, but what makes a comedy work in Malaysia might not work in Indonesia, and vice versa. So we might want to use those talent as part of us of telling the story to the audience across the region. So that's the second pillar when you talk about expansion. And so we talk about 100. And the third part, which we are looking at and venturing, and we will invest ourselves, is to create what we call the tech side, on the tech audio space. We are envisioning ourselves of creating a product, a software for recording, editing, and publishing, and it's a platform on the cloud with its machine learning capabilities that will help creators to create a professional audio podcast. So you can see that there are three pillars of the Podkesmas Asia want to grow themselves in the future.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So right now, Podkesmas is still focusing in Indonesia right now, right?
For this year,
Yeah.
we'll be expanding. Although we are focusing on Indonesia, but based on the data that we see on the platform from through our platform that record, which is Anchor and Spotify, there's actually interesting data showing that there's a lot of people actually listening in Malaysia, a lot of people actually listening in US. We've got shows that are been listening even, I'm not sure if data correct or not, but it shows that people from Kenya is listening to one of our shows, which is, we have internal jokes about it. We already gone global, even without having a presence global, because that again, the technology helps those expansions. But again, when we talk about presence and we talk about focus, yes, in currently right now we're talking about Indonesia this year, but next year we'll start our expansion to other markets.
Okay, so which market do you think you would be expanding first?
I think we're looking at the Southeast Asia. I can't say that which market yet, but right now we are in the verge of having a very serious discussion of a partnerships. But it is something that I don't want to steal the thunder, but I think we'll be announcing it on January soon on which market which will be our partners for Podkesmas Asia expanding for the region. But we started with Southeast Asia first because again, when you look at the numbers, it's 300 million audio podcasts. And when you look at the advertising business for podcasts in Southeast Asia, is projected by 2027 will be 1 billion. So that will be similar to 1 billion in US in 2021. So you can see that there's a huge opportunity for actually to go there in Southeast Asia.
Okay, so probably the last question. Do you have a message that you would like to tell people, to the digital media and publishers right now that they're still in doubt of going digital, especially in Southeast Asia, because most of them are still going traditional, being in printed and like traditional media such as television and radio. Do you have any message for them to tell them?
Something that is very important, my background in media before, right? You can't avoid the unavoidable. So you can't avoid something that is there. We have to accept that right now we're looking at a consumer that is already mobile first, internet first, everything. It's already there. People are, and now I would say, I don't want to say it's mobile first and internet first. We're looking at a generation that is digital first. They are already very attuned to the way on how you handle yourself in the digital world. That's why you cannot avoid that the growth of audio, that is part of their daily life. And you can't avoid that, right now in Indonesia alone, people are already spending around 46 minutes, almost an hour of listening in audio podcasts. So, and Thailand is leading 16 minutes on a daily basis. So you cannot neglect that people are going there and will be there. Now, talk about how does that happen because of digitalization. So the digitalization is something you can't avoid. You, as a media, you need to venture off all of this medium, this channel, because this is where your consumer will be. And neglecting that and not focusing or not creating an actionable, or I would say a very strategic approach to this medium will leave you out of this consumer mind. At the end of the day, that will hinder your business to grow. So you can't avoid it. And the second part with this digitalization first, where people are accustomed to pay using electronic transaction, e-wallet, pay, you name it, all the electronic wallets. So you can't avoid it. So think about that is part of your strategic action and strategic thinking when you are building or you want to live into any of that chosen medium. When you talk about video, talk about the possibility of venturing or using this transactional model. If you're in audio, think about how can you optimize and actually get into this transactional possibility. So it's there. So and think about that, that if you avoid that, again, if you avoid this opportunity, you're actually losing the game.
Okay. Thank you very much for the interview. We hope that your message will be heard by everyone. And of course, we will be waiting for you at the event itself, the second Digital Media and Publishing. So maybe you would like to say something to your listeners.
I'm looking forward to this digital summit, and I'm looking forward to talk to you more about how the podcast grows and how you should be looking at this podcast industry. That this is not just a hobbyist, but this is a real serious and professional game. And when you look at this podcast business, it's not just for creators. Think about that you're creating more IPs. So what we're going to be talking about how this opportunity that actually uh, shows in front of us, and you need to capture it today, not later.
Okay, then. So thank you very much for today's interview. So we will see you again at the summit. Thank
Thank
you.
you.